And finally, let's pay tribute to the team that has been the most dominant in Major League Baseball in the first half. That would be the Philadelphia Phillies. Welcome, everyone, to the All-Star edition of Fair Territory. I'm coming to you live from a hotel room in Dallas, Texas. I want to do something a little bit different this week to start off the show, and we're going to do the top 10 moments from the first half. These are my top 10 moments, and actually some of them aren't exactly moments, but bear with me, work with me, it'll all come out fine. So we're going to start off in chronological order, and then I've got a few at the end that, like I said, aren't really moments, but more things. So let's start off with April 27th. Why April 27th? That was the day Aaron Judge's ascent began. If you remember, Aaron Judge had a horrible April. It was brutal, actually, late March to April. Look at this. Before April 27th, he batted .178, just 4 homers, and a .674 OPS. Since April 27th, oh my goodness, .360 batting average, 30 home runs, and a 1.294 OPS. April 27th was a big day for Aaron Judge, a big day for the Yankees, as it turned out, and really a big day for baseball because Aaron Judge right now is the leading contender for American League MVP. All right, next date, that'll be May 5th. This gets us to Shohei a little bit. Shohei Ohtani, this was probably his best game of the first half. He went 4 for 4, 2 home runs against the Braves. That included a 464-foot blast. Ohtani has had a lot of good games. He has picked up the slack in the leadoff spot for the Dodgers since Mookie Betts has gone down. He has had, perhaps, an MVP first half of his own, and that was the game I picked. I'm sure there are others that you might have in mind, but that was a good one for Shohei. May 11th, this might have been the biggest day of the season for many of us, Paul Skenes' Major League debut. It was against the Cubs for the Pirates, of course. He struck out 7 that day, and that was the start of a run that has taken him to the start of the All-Star game Tuesday night in Arlington. He is 6-0 with a 1.90 ERA. Paul Skenes, leading candidate for Rookie of the Year in the National League. May 16th. This was a cool night. It happened late for those on the East Coast. It was the night Elly De La Cruz had a monster game against the Dodgers and then declared Los Angeles my city, quote unquote, my city. He went 4 for 4 that night. He had a double, an RBI, 3 runs, and 4 stolen bases. And you do that kind of thing in one game, you can declare the city your city. And that's what Elly did. That was an incredible performance by him. May 16th. Okay, 5 days later, May 21st, another tall shortstop in the NL Central. This was the night Oneil Cruz broke StatCast. If you remember what he did, it was incredible, honestly. 3 batted balls over 115 miles per hour. 2 over 120 miles per hour. Now, I know some of you think StatCast and exit velocity is ridiculous, but the cool part about these numbers is we can measure how hard players are hitting balls and how impressive an individual performance like what Oneil Cruz did might be. That was a pretty impressive individual performance. Oneil Cruz, May 21st, the 3 balls over 115. All right, fast forward to June 7th. June 7th to June 9th. If you remember that Dodgers-Yankees series at Yankee Stadium, it was incredible. The quality of baseball was perhaps the highest we've seen all season. That was Teoscar Hernandez's weekend in New York. He had a monster weekend, 6 for 12, 3 home runs. And we saw Yamamoto at his best in the Friday night game. We saw Luis Gil Sunday night. All of the games, well, the second one was kind of a blowout in the end, but all 3 had their moments of real intensity. What is interesting about that series is the Dodgers and Yankees really haven't been the same since. Dodgers 15-15 since, injuries a part of it. Yankees 12-19. So while that series marked kind of a peak for those teams and maybe for the sport in the first half, it also marked the start of a downturn. All right, moving forward. This next one might be my favorite thing in the first half. Actually, one of the favorite things I've ever covered and one of the best things Major League Baseball has ever done. I'm talking about June 20th, the Rickwood game. The tribute to the Negro Leagues just 2 days after the passing of Willie Mays. It was on Fox. I was part of the broadcast, of course. But the night in general was so sweet, so wonderful, such great memories. You see John Batiste there doing his thing before the game. My favorite part of the whole experience was seeing the major league players from the Giants and Cardinals lining up there, of course, on the foul lines. But before the game, this was off camera, they lined up and kind of went through a line meeting all of the former Negro Leagues players. And it was a night when baseball honored its past and acknowledged as well the darkness of its past and how the sport was segregated and how we cannot forget what these players went through. Again, one of my favorite nights of my career, certainly one of the best nights of the season. Okay, the final three things I have, they're not necessarily tied to any date. They're just cool things that happened in the first half. We're going to start with the emergences of Gunnar Henderson and Bobby Witt Jr. as two of the best shortstops in the game, of course, two of the best young players in the game as well. Henderson, a legitimate MVP candidate, and so is Bobby Witt Jr. These guys have carried their teams, the Orioles and Royals respectively, to really strong first halves. They're both extremely exciting, fun players to watch. Henderson with all the home runs from the leadoff spot, Witt with his all-around play. He can do everything on the baseball field, including run really fast. So those two guys, they're big stars. They're here in Arlington. They'll be part of the Home Run Derby on Monday night. It's great to see what they've accomplished. Now, also, let's not forget the two surprising leaders in the Central Divisions have similar stories. The Cleveland Guardians, new manager Stephen Vogt, the Milwaukee Brewers, new manager Pat Murphy. In neither case did anyone really expect these teams to do what they've done. You might have thought they'd be okay, but no one thought they'd be leading the division pretty much wire to wire the entire first half. The Guardians transformed their offense. They were a bottom four offense last year. This year they've been a top 10 offense for most of the first half and a top 5 for part of it, in part because they changed their offensive philosophy. They basically said in spring training, no more punch and Judy. Let's start trying to hit the ball hard. It worked for them pretty well. Guardians, a remarkable performance in the first half. Brewers, the same. The Brewers are a little bit different in the way they're constructed. They've got a bunch of young position players that are really outstanding. They have Christian Yelich being their Jose Ramirez as well. And like the Guardians, they have got problems in the rotation and not quite as powerful a bullpen. But at the same time, they've done some amazing things in the first half. They play a very athletic, aggressive style. They've been fun to watch. Both these teams are going to need to be active at the deadline to fix their rotations. They've got huge problems in that regard. Those are reasons, their flawed rotations, to see them as not necessarily strong World Series contenders, but certainly they're going to be in the race, no doubt about that, for the rest of the season. And finally, let's pay tribute to the team that has been the most dominant in Major League Baseball in the first half. That would be the Philadelphia Phillies. 62-34, best record in baseball, and they've done it with a rotation that has had the best rotation ERA in the major leagues. Nola and Wheeler and Sanchez and Suarez, this whole group, and even the fill-in guys, Spencer Turnbull when he had his moments there, Taijuan Walker at times, he's been hurt, of course, and not himself, but the top four have been remarkable in their performance. They're just a team that has a great vibe about them. I've spoken about this before. Even with the injuries to Turner and later to Harper and Schwarber and, of course, to Real Muto as well, they have trucked on. They have done a great job all season. They're going to be a very formidable team going forward and in the postseason because of that rotation. So there you have it, my top 10, I guess we'll call them things from the first half. It was a remarkable first half, honestly. A lot of fun. You see all the great moments we had, all the amazing things that went on in this sport, and I'm greatly looking forward, of course, to the second half as well. Time now for the Inside Dish, the part of the show where I talk maybe about a story I've written, a trend in the game, something else entirely, or on this particular day, we're going to go way back in the time machine in honor of the amateur draft taking place right now in Major League Baseball. We saw the first round last night, continues today, and I'm going to go back to 1984. And the first pick of that draft, one of the most memorable busts in Major League history, Shawn Abner. And why am I going to talk about Shawn Abner? Because I'm going to take you in the time machine way back all of these years to when I started my professional career that year, 1984, in York, Pennsylvania. I had graduated the University of Pennsylvania. York is a city about 90 miles west of Philly. It's the only place that would hire me. I went 0 for 75 in my applications. I had connections in places like Biloxi, Mississippi, and Fargo, North Dakota. I had ins in those places, and I still couldn't get jobs there. And the only reason I ended up in York was because of a college friend of mine, John Delapina, who was already there. John went on to great things. He is now the senior vice president of communications for the NHL, and he recommended me. I got there, and then a couple of months after I started, actually, really only a month, I think, Shawn Abner was the number one pick in the Major League Baseball draft. Shawn Abner was a kid from Mechanicsburg, Pennsylvania, which was not really in York's coverage area, but it was in a county north, or maybe a couple of counties north. It wasn't far. It was maybe a 45-minute drive. And I got assigned to do a long story that turned into a three-part series on this kid who had been taken out of high school as the number one choice in the Major League Baseball draft by the Mets. So I went up to Mechanicsburg, spent some time there with Shawn, his parents, talked to the Mets people who were involved in his selection, and really got into it. And I was quite proud of the stories that I did. I don't know how good they were looking back, but I did my best. And then, of course, went about following Shawn Abner's career because I had written about him, and this kid was sort of local in that area at the time. And man, a number one pick, how cool is that? Here's a clip, or at least a photo of the clip from that time. That paper, the York Daily Record, which was actually, for a small paper, really good. We had a great staff, and I was proud to be part of that staff. So anyway, Shawn goes on and never really becomes the player that anyone thought. And like I said, he was one of the great busts among top overall picks in Major League history. We're talking about guys like Steve Chilcott and Brian Taylor and Todd Van Poppel. He's right on that list. Number one picks who didn't make it. And if you look at the notable picks from the 1984 first round, you'll see not necessarily a number of great names, but there's one in particular that jumps out. That third name on this list, Mark McGwire. He was the 10th overall selection in that draft by the Oakland A's. Bill Swift went to the Mariners, number 2. He had a good career. Jay Bell to the Twins, the 8th pick, also a good career. Shane Mack, Oddibe McDowell, and Terry Mulholland, also part of that first round. So there were some players in there, but the Mets took Abner, and he never quite made it. He was a guy who didn't ever play for the Mets, it turns out. He had a career that lasted, about 400 games. And he played for the Padres, the Angels, and the White Sox. And you can look at his stats. They're not great. His career numbers were not anything to really speak of. So his career was a bust, and it didn't turn out the way you wanted. And it was kind of a lesson, as we've seen from time to time over the years, of how the draft is an inexact science. Now, occasionally, you'll get number one overall picks who become amazing Hall of Fame caliber players. I'm thinking of Ken Griffey. I'm thinking of Alex Rodriguez. I'm thinking, of course, of the latest number one pick to hit the majors, and that's Paul Skenes. He's not a Hall of Famer yet, but one day he might be talked about in that kind of company. These are picks that certainly were great number one overall picks. Garrett Cole was another one. We can go right down the list. But it's not always the case. And there are things that happen in a guy's career, in a guy's life, that just don't turn out the way anyone expected. The draft, it seems to me, has become more exact over the years. We don't see the number ones miss the way they did, although I guess you can make the point. Mickey Moniak, Phillies number one from a few years back, certainly hasn't turned out to be a star the way people thought he might have, being a number one pick. He's now with the Angels. He's doing okay. But, hey, number one pick, you would think superstar. Anyway, this story has kind of a sad ending. Not kind of. It was a sad ending. Shawn Abner, for whatever reason, had some issues in his life, and in 2020 or so was found guilty of a felony charge of aggravated animal cruelty. And he actually went to jail for this. He had abandoned his ailing dog, and people noticed this and found it, and he was charged, and he spent some time in jail. He was sentenced to 4.5 to 23 months. I don't know exactly how much time he served in jail, but Shawn Abner, it just kind of went awry for him as a person after he didn't make it as a player. So that's not the part of the story I wanted to dwell on, obviously. I just remember my excitement personally at being able to interview at age 21, which is what I was coming out of school, this big prospect. I didn't even know at that point I would be a baseball writer. I didn't know what was going to happen in my career. I was just starting out covering high schools. And I didn't really have a goal of being a baseball writer. I had a goal of being a beat writer for any professional sport in any city. It didn't matter to me. Ended up in Baltimore and went from there. But that was really my first big assignment. And again, it was instructive in many ways on just how the MLB draft is unlike others. You don't know exactly what you're getting every time you pick. Time now for Grillin Ken, the part of the show where you guys get to ask me questions and I get to answer. All right, let's start with the first question this week. It comes back to something we talked about at the top of the show, the Cleveland Guardians. Tom Hicks asks, will the Guardians make multiple moves at the deadline, especially a power-hitting outfielder and one or two starting pitchers? Eric Fedde and Taylor Ward, to me, are ideal trade targets. Good question. Good thoughts, Tom. They need more than anything starting pitching. They've been relying on Tanner Bybee and Ben Lively. Gavin Williams has now entered the picture, but Bieber's hurt, out for the year. Tristan McKenzie in the minor leagues, they're trying to get him at right. He just has not been what they thought he would be coming off that injury. They badly need two starters, as you mentioned. That's number one. That should preclude anything else. Now, if they can get a power hitting outfielder, sure, that would be something that would be quite useful to them as well. I was looking it up this morning. They've used 8 right fielders and 7 center fielders. They're 27th in the majors in OPS out of right field, 16th out of center field. So certainly they could use more production out of their outfield. But in my view, they could live with what they have and keep mixing and matching in the outfield if they get better starting pitching. They have to get that. That is absolutely their priority, and I expect them to be active. And Eric Fedde is a really good name for them. He's not a guy who's terribly expensive, making $7.5 million this year and next, and he's under control for next season. So I could see him being a really logical guy. Taylor Ward from the Angels, if the Angels move him, sure, that's a good piece as well. All right, now to the next question. This one concerns the Washington Nationals. Question is from Eric Johnson, who asks, how optimistic are you about the Nationals heading into 2025 and beyond? I'm optimistic because I love what they've done bringing in young talent, and especially in the Soto trade, which is being shown to be an absolute bonanza for them. Mackenzie Gore, CJ Abrams is an all-star. James Wood is up now. He's one of the top prospects in the game, and there's more to come from that trade as well. And they have other young players coming. Dylan Cruz from last year's draft. They just made a trade. I thought a good trade for them involving Hunter Harvey, in which they got a third base prospect and the 39th pick in Sunday night's draft, which they used and will enter into their system as well. My concern with the Nationals is ownership. And will they spend enough money to support what they've got coming? At some point, you're going to have to buy some veterans. Now, what's interesting about their ownership is at times the Lerners, the family that owns the team, has spent and spent big. Too big in the case of Steven Strasburg and even some others. But they have done that. Haven't done it lately. And remember, there have been times when the team has been for sale, then not for sale. So no one really knows what their intentions are. And we talked on the Fox broadcast Saturday about Juan Soto and where he might end up. And we raised the possibility, could the Nationals pursue him again? And it's interesting, right? They did trade him. It ended kind of badly. He didn't take the $440 million offer that they made over 15 years, etc. But Juan Soto's going to the highest bidder. Could the Nationals re-enter the picture and be the highest bidder for Juan Soto? I don't see it happening, but I don't know. It's not out of the question. In any case, they need to spend money. That's the message here, and they need to support what they have. And this offseason will be a really important test for the Washington Nationals and their future. All right, the final question today. This one comes from EJ Fagan, who asked, these are great questions this week, by the way. If the Yankees traded for a second baseman like Jonathan India, what could a Gleyber Torres market look like? Well, EJ, you hit on it, because if you trade for India, or any other second baseman for that matter, The question then becomes, what happens to Gleyber, who is a potential free agent? If this India deal was to come together, and it's highly speculative even to be talking about it, we don't know if the Reds even want to trade Jonathan India. They've resisted in the past, even when it seemed they had a surplus of infielders. And even though they enter the break with playoff odds of about 8% and obviously tilting toward becoming sellers, they might see India, who is under control for 2 more years, as part of what they're going to be doing in 25 and 26. So I don't know that they'll trade him. But if they were willing to move him, what happens to Gleyber Torres? Well, maybe if you're the Reds, you say, okay, we'll trade him to the Yankees, but we want prospect A, B, and C, whatever the case might be, whichever young players they want. And then you take Torres back for the rest of the season. You're covered at second base. You can still give the illusion of contention because you're having a major league guy replace India. I don't know if that would even be discussed. I don't know if either team would find it acceptable, but that's one way to go about it. Gleyber's market value is not going to be great. He's not having a great first half. Teams generally don't have great holes at second base. They don't necessarily need to fill that. The Yankees do, it seems, right now. But in general, that is not a position of need for most clubs. So I don't know what would happen to Gleyber in that situation. I imagine he would be part of a separate deal, and it would not get much in return for the Yankees for a guy on an expiring contract and one who is not playing all that well, or at least not as well as he has in the past. All right, I want to thank everyone for their questions, everyone for listening, for watching. You know where to find us: YouTube, Apple, Spotify. Subscribe to us, like us. We'll be back on Thursday. All-Star Game postscript with Alana Rizzo, our usual Thursday show, live at, what time is that show? Oh, it's 12:30 Eastern, 9:30 Pacific. Have a great All-Star week, everyone.
Your first bet offer with BetMGM is up to $1,500 back in bonus bets if your bet falls when you place your first wager and sign up and deposit at least $10 into a new account. You can download the app or hit up BetMGM.com, and if the bet falls, loses, your bonus bets will be available once your initial wager is settled. Gambling problem or concern? Call 1-800-GAMBLER.